On this Sunday night, home by 8. The streets in Quebec fall silent as a curfew takes effect.
Quebec will likely see a drop in rates, but there are going to be consequences.
Is it the answer to curbing COVID-19 cases as Ontario considers the move? More Republicans turn on U.S. President Donald Trump.
You don't deserve to leave the party anymore.
As lawmakers grow fearful of what loyalists could do next. And selling off or selling out? Are artists jeopardizing their legacies by giving up the rights to their songs?
Global National with Robin Gill. Reporting tonight, Colleen Christie.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us. We begin tonight in Quebec, which is under a curfew for the first time in more than half a century. The month-long restrictions started last night. From 8 o'clock to 5 this morning, the streets were mostly quiet across the province. There were some protests and some concerns that police were being too heavy-handed. Michael Couteur has our top story tonight.
We weren't stopping. We didn't stop at any stores.
Melissa Calhoun and her family were on their way back to Montreal from New Brunswick after attending to her ailing father. She had hoped to return before the provincial curfew came into effect, but was delayed. At around 10:30 p.m., with 3 young kids in the back seat, Quebec Provincial Police pulled her car over.
Basically, they said it appears as though you're in a gray zone, which means you probably shouldn't be getting the ticket. But because you're past curfew, we have no choice but to give you the ticket.
Both Calhoun and her husband were each fined over $1,500. The couple is going to contest the penalty, and they could have a good case. But the people who protested Saturday night might have a tougher time. Dozens defied the curfew in Montreal, marching through the streets, claiming it's an overreach by the government.
I think it's unjust and it's against the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
Police handed out dozens of fines across the province at similar demonstrations. Many protesters vowed to fight the fines, claiming the curfew is a violation of charter rights.
I think the end result will be that the emergency was serious enough, that the measures were proportionate and not excessive to the point of destroying people.
Now, the goal is to slow the spread of COVID-19. Curfews in countries like France reduce the acceleration of transmission for people who are 60 and older, but studies found only a full lockdown worked for younger age groups.
This is a very, sledgehammer measure to try to, get things down and get mobility down. At the end of the day, it may work slightly, but again, there may be difficult discussions in terms of the downstream consequences of this.
Despite the sledgehammer approach at night, Quebec schools are set to restart in-person learning Monday morning. That has teacher unions worried.
Where are the new measures for schools to keep our kids safe, to keep school staff safe? They're just not there.
Some worry without a full lockdown of the province, COVID-19 case numbers will continue to climb. Michael Couture, Global News, Ottawa.
There are calls for Ontario to follow Quebec's lead and impose a curfew in that province. Numbers are soaring, and new modelling this week is expected to have grim predictions. But as Catherine Ward reports, some experts believe a curfew could make matters worse.
But the other big thing about curfews is that it's kind of akin to squeezing that last drop of juice out of an already squeezed lemon.
Restrictions, hard limits, and closures, and still the number of COVID-19 cases in Ontario continues to climb.
Before the holidays, we were begging people to stay at home, but half of the people didn't listen. So I don't know what you do. I think the next step is really increased enforcement, which is something we don't want.
Marcus Michelucci knows what it's like to be under lockdown. The musician and teacher is living in the UK and has had to adapt.
I think that if people had done what we needed to do more in the beginning and just listened to it and stayed locked down, kept away, then we'd probably be out of it sooner.
Sources tell Global News Ontario's government is looking at the possibility of imposing a curfew limiting overnight movement. However, some experts say that tactic might not help.
As long as you restrict people more, does it make them more adherent, or does it just give them more incentive to find loopholes and have their fatigue take out of it?
The thing is, I don't think this is going to make much of a difference Ironically, it could potentially make things worse because it's driving people inside more, and that's where we're seeing a bulk of transmission is occurring.
Infectious disease physicians also say a curfew does not necessarily target the root cause of the virus's spread, and some say more focus should be placed on testing blitzes, implementing paid sick leave, and the use of isolation centers.
People who are in essential workplaces like factories, food processing plants, warehouses, if you get the virus there, it's something that a lockdown doesn't address, and we really need to kind of look at those to address it.
Catherine Ward, Global News, Toronto.
More than a dozen people took part in a rally today to draw attention to Ontario's long-term care crisis. The demonstration happened outside St. George Community Care. The for-profit facility has one of the worst long-term care COVID-19 outbreaks in Ontario. Right now, it has more than 70 active cases. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh attended the rally along with Green Party leader Annamie Paul. Her father was a resident at the facility. He died in May after developing a serious infection.
No one in this country at any stage of life should have to die from a preventable bladder infection that can be treated with a course of antibiotics. That is what happened to my father. Okay, so he did not die from the virus, but he died from COVID.
According to Toronto's University Health Network, which is temporarily managing the home, 17 residents have died in the latest outbreak, 14 from COVID. The arrival of 2 new variants of COVID-19 in Canada is putting renewed pressure on governments to ramp up the vaccine rollout. The first case of the South African variant was detected late last week in Alberta. And as Heather Yourex-West explains, experts say it's only a matter of time before we see more.
As officials across Canada work to vaccinate as many people as they can against COVID-19, there are new reminders that the virus is moving quickly too.
There is a race here. There's a race between us getting this out of circulation and it evolving in order to avoid the things that we're trying to do to limit its growth.
Canada has detected its first case of the South African variant of COVID-19. At least 14 cases of the UK variant have been found here as well. They're no more deadly, and the vaccine will likely still offer good protection, but both variants spread more easily in the community, and that is a major cause for concern.
If you have a more transmissible virus, even if it doesn't in and of itself cause more severe disease, if you have more people infected with the virus, that's just a greater proportion of people infected, which means a greater number of hospitalizations and sadly a greater number of deaths.
What public health officials don't want are these variants to begin circulating widely. A virus that behaves differently may not be as easily controlled with current mask policies or capacity limits, and additional measures may be required to keep infection levels at bay.
It's entirely plausible that a dominant contagious strain would mean that we couldn't have schools open. That's possible. My biggest concern, though, is shared air, honestly, that even with masks on, shared air may become a little bit less safe.
It's why the federal government has taken new steps to keep these variants from arriving in the country, requiring travelers now present a negative COVID test before boarding an incoming flight.
We have to make sure that these variants that might spread more easily do not start rapid outbreaks in the community and infecting large numbers of people.
Alberta's chief medical health officer says there is no evidence the province's first case of the South African variant has spread in the community. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
Members of the U.S. House of Representatives will introduce an article of impeachment against President Donald Trump this week. And some prominent Republicans are joining the call for Trump to leave office over his incitement of a violent mob that stormed the Capitol building. Now, as Jennifer Johnson reports, politicians on both sides of the aisle are facing threats against their lives from emboldened Trump loyalists.
More than 200 House members and over 37 senators are now calling on U.S. President Donald Trump to resign, be removed from office, or face impeachment. Top Republicans joining that list.
I think the best way for our country, Chuck, is for the president to resign and go away as soon as possible.
Even the president's former acting chief of staff and one of his greatest offenders has had enough.
The ideas of the Republican Party are bigger than one man, but I think if you have any role at all in what happened on Wednesday, that you don't deserve to leave the party anymore.
A procession carrying the body of Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, killed in the riots, drove by the Capitol Sunday afternoon when the White House finally lowered its flag to half-mast. The flag was lowered at the Capitol Friday. The president remains out of sight, as many lawmakers fear what his loyalists may do next.
The number of death threats that have been thrown out against people like me and, frankly, every member of Congress. Look at Vice President Pence, one of the most faithful guys to Donald Trump, is now public enemy #1 in Trump world.
Several sources inside the White House say President Trump hasn't spoken to Pence since the siege. Meanwhile, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is requesting members return to Washington. An article of impeachment against the president is expected to be introduced late Monday or Tuesday, but some want to delay a possible Senate trial.
Let's give President-elect Biden the 100 days he needs to get his agenda off and running, and maybe we'll send the articles sometimes after that.
To protect lawmakers and others, Twitter has silenced the president. Apple and Amazon have cracked down on another site favored by extremists, Parler. Washington is under a state of emergency. Its mayor has asked the Department of Homeland Security for added protection starting Monday, as the National Guard erects what it says is a non-scalable fence protecting the Capitol ahead of Inauguration Day. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Search crews off Indonesia's coast have located the black boxes from a passenger jet that crashed into the Java Sea this weekend. Officials detected pings from the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder within 200 meters of the crash site. Efforts are underway to recover them from the sea floor. Parts of the engine from the Boeing 737-500 series jet have been pulled from the water, along with pieces of the fuselage, other debris, and human remains. 50 passengers, including 10 children and 12 crew members, were on board when the plane went down shortly after taking off from Indonesia's capital, Jakarta. The cause of the crash is still under investigation. Coming up, as UK COVID numbers climb, so too does its massive vaccine rollout. And what the Pope is now saying about getting the vaccine. Britain is preparing to ramp up its COVID-19 inoculation program. More than 600,000 notices are expected to arrive on doorsteps and inboxes across England this week, asking the elderly to make a vaccine appointment. The UK is aiming to vaccinate about 15 million people by the middle of next month. So far, around 2 million doses have been administered. The country's health secretary says Britain is on course to meet its target.
Over the last week, we've vaccinated more people than in the entirety of December. So we're accelerating the rollout. Getting to over 200,000 people a day is significant progress. And amongst those who we need to reach most, amongst the over 80s, we've now vaccinated around a third of all of the over 80s.
Officials hope a speedy mass vaccination rollout will help get Britain back to normal life soon. The country entered its third national lockdown earlier this month. Pope Francis has confirmed he'll be vaccinated. The 84-year-old is scheduled to get the shot as early as next week when the Vatican starts its inoculation program. The pontiff is vulnerable to the virus. First, his age, and he had part of his lung removed during an illness when he was a young man. The Pope is urging everyone to get the shot to protect not only their lives, but others. The Spanish government is sending out rescue convoys to deliver vaccines to areas cut off by snow from Storm Filomena. Along with those vaccines, convoys will also be carrying food supplies as some places begin facing shortages. The move comes after central Spain, including Madrid, was paralyzed by its heaviest snowfall in decades. 4 people have died because of the blizzard, and forecasters warn more dangerous conditions are ahead as temperatures drop in the next week. Just ahead, how 2 students are getting pandemic information to indigenous peoples here and around the world.
You're watching Global National.
As shots begin to reach remote First Nations across Canada, Indigenous leaders are encouraging their communities to get vaccinated. As of Friday, Indigenous Services Canada had confirmed nearly 10,000 cases of COVID-19 in First Nations communities across the country. But chiefs say some members are hesitant to get the shot because of discrimination and distrust in the healthcare system. And that's not the only barrier facing Indigenous communities fighting the virus. There's often a lack of information for those who speak different languages. But as Linda Aylesworth reports, a BC medical student is helping to change that.
There's been a lot of information to take in since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic and a lot of changes to adapt to.
One of the main things that people have had to adapt to is masks. The second thing has to be about social distancing, and the last thing about hand hygiene.
But what if you were an Indigenous person who wasn't privy to that information because it wasn't available in your native language?
A lot of the times, marginalized populations are left behind. And I think COVID-19 is a perfect example to exemplify that, where Indigenous communities across the world are disproportionately being affected by COVID-19.
Sukhmeet Satchel, a second-year University of BC medical student, wasn't the only one who was concerned. So was Victor Carmen, a Harvard student on the other side of the continent.
As an Indigenous medical student, I felt like I was in a position where I could do some good.
It was on Facebook that the two found each other and combined forces with a few other like-minded students to make a difference.
And so one of the things we came up with was Translations for Our Nations, where we provide information about COVID-19 in Indigenous languages.
They went about recruiting over 100 Indigenous-speaking people in 40 countries to translate fact sheets, then created a website that made it all available free of charge.
When we go to translations, these are all the different Indigenous languages that we have.
Among the many languages they've translated, Samburu in northern Kenya.
One of them for COVID-19 information for Indigenous children and youth. And it's something like this, which is very visual.
The team was thrilled to get this photo of the Samburu children looking at the material for the first time.
Everyone there was so receptive, and they really appreciated the efforts that were being taken.
The project has been such a success that Victor and Sukhmeet hope to roll out information on the COVID-19 vaccine next, and perhaps even meet one day.
We talk all the time about what we can do together to really make a difference in this world.
Linda Aylesworth, Global News.
Up next, what a major business deal will mean for the legacy of one of Canada's iconic musicians. To another music legend now. They're some of the best loved songs in this country and around the world, and soon you may be hearing them on commercials pitching everything from cars to insurance. Neil Young has sold a half stake in his songs to an investment company that specializes in combining popular music with advertising. As Ross Lord reports, it's left his fans wondering what these massive business deals will mean for Young's and other artists' legacies.
As a legendary singer-songwriter, Neil Young has a reputation for protecting how his music is used.
Ain't singing for Pepsi. Ain't singing for Coke.
But Young's songs will be connected to commercial products, according to fellow Canadian Yourex-West. He owns an investment company, Hypnosis, that just bought a 50% stake in Young's catalog. That's more than 1,000 songs.
So we're able to put more time and effort into putting the songs in movies, TV commercials, making sure that they're on all the right playlists on Spotify and Apple.
Yourex says he's been a Neil Young fan since he was a child. He says Young is at a point in his life where he's wondering what will become of the songs after he's gone. Using songs to sell other products isn't new. Remember this Bank of Montreal commercial from 1996? To this day, there's outrage that Bob Dylan allowed a classic protest song to be used in a bank promotion.
I think we should fight against this. Like the times they are changing. These are counterculture songs against the man. Commercial songs are the man. Like
the Timexes, they are a change.
Last month, Dylan sold publishing rights to his entire catalog, more than 600 songs, for between $300 million and $500 million. Stevie Nicks, of Fleetwood Mac fame, recently sold her music for a reported $100 million. Young's deal includes more than 1,000 songs, reportedly for $150 million, although he keeps 50% ownership.
My job is to bring Neil the best opportunities possible, but the decisions will be ultimately be made by Neil as to whether or not something is done with the song.
On the receiving end of those decisions are fans, like this former music reviewer.
So if you suddenly hear a song that helped define you and your personality and how you've lived, and suddenly it's selling motor oil, might be good if you're a car fan, but if you're not a car fan, and you might be a little bit offended.
He says it's unclear if song sell-offs are good for fans or if the only winners are the artists and businesses making the transactions.
There's notes for you.
Ross Lord, Global News.
That is Global National for this Sunday. I'm Colleen Christie. Tonight's Your Canada is Gimli, Manitoba. Show us your part of the country. Email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks for watching. Donna Friesen will be back at the desk tomorrow. Have a good night.